Hi everyone, welcome to your Lab B Lecture 1. This lecture is going to be all about demonstrations and why demonstrations are so important when you're teaching physical education. Before we get into talking specifically about demonstrations and how to do a good demonstration, I want to share a couple of theories with you. The first one is social learning theory. You may have learned about this in a psychology class that you've taken. Basically, the social learning theory is the idea that humans learn and develop through interactions and observations of other humans. So basically, we learn by watching others. When you're born, you are exposed to different people and you watch how they move and interact and talk. And that's how you learn how to do those things. If you're kept in isolation, you don't learn how to do those things. So the interaction with other people and watching, seeing, hearing what they're doing and how they're doing it is really important to our development. I also want to talk a little bit about self-efficacy. Again, another thing that you may have learned about in a psychology class. So very simply, self-efficacy is how well you think you can do something or perform a skill. And how well you think you can do something affects your performance. If you have anxiety and you don't think you can do something very well, it may affect your performance. But if you have confidence in yourself, it's likely that you can do that skill or perform that skill better. Both of these things come into play when we're teaching physical education and when we're doing the demonstrations. I'm going to come back to those two theories a little bit later in the lecture. So how do these two things apply to PE? Why do I talk about self-efficacy and the social learning theory? It all has to do with demonstrations. Demonstrations are extremely important when teaching PE, which is why this next lab is focused on the demonstration of a skill. When you're teaching PE, you will always do a demonstration, and most likely several demonstrations during a class. You'll demonstrate skills, you'll demonstrate how to do tasks, you'll demonstrate movement throughout the gym. A visual demonstration along with a verbal explanation is very important. This is why when I was explaining your Lab A, I didn't just tell you how to do it. I gave you an example. I gave you a demonstration of how to perform your Lab A. For this next teaching lab, you're going to do the same thing you did in Lab A, plus you're going to demonstrate a skill. So you can start thinking about that as we move forward and talk about what are the characteristics of a good demonstration. All right, so what are the characteristics of a good demonstration? This is where we're getting into the mechanics of teaching a little bit. I could tell you, do your Lab A, go ahead and demonstrate a skill. But I need to give you some mechanics for how to do that demonstration. There are specific characteristics that I can teach you that will make your demonstration better. When you're demonstrating a skill, you always want to do it more than once, depending on the skill. All of these are depending on the skill, and I'll give some examples of that as we move through them. You don't want to just perform the skill once and then move on. People learn by watching. Think about when someone demonstrates a skill for you. Are there times when you say, hey, can you just show me that again? Yeah, let me see that part again. And you start to learn. The more you see a skill, the more you pick up on how you can do that skill or how you're supposed to do that skill. So always demonstrate more than once, 2, 3, maybe 4 times, again, depending on the skill. I say depending on the skill because some skills are going to take a long time to demonstrate, while other skills don't take very long. For example, a push-up. You do 1, 2, 3 push-ups, doesn't take more than 3, 4 seconds. If you're demonstrating a dance sequence, that's going to take a little bit longer. You don't want to take the time out of your class and demonstrate a dance 3, 4 times. So that might be only 2 times. So this is where the art comes in. The mechanics or the science of teaching is do the demonstration more than once. The art of teaching is realizing, oh, this one takes a little bit longer, the dance takes a little bit longer, so I'm only going to demonstrate it twice. A push-up doesn't take me very long. I'm going to demonstrate a couple times. Our next characteristic of a good demonstration is do the skill at full speed. It's most likely, again, depending on the skill, that you will break the skill down and show the different parts and show them at a slower speed so your students can really see how to do the different parts of the skill. But always follow up with full speed. One of the methods of demonstration that you may have learned about is do a whole part whole. So with this, you would demonstrate the full skill at full speed, and then you would break it down and show the different parts at a slow motion, again, if possible, and then again, show the skill at full speed. Another characteristic of a good demonstration is using cues, so establishing cues and teaching those cues to your students while you're demonstrating the skill. A cue is a short phrase or a series of words that are going to help students remember how to do the skill. A really common example of cues is beef. This is what we use to remember how to shoot a basketball. Okay, so if you remember, BEEF stands for balance. Okay, get a nice athletic stance. Elbow, get your elbow up. Eyes looking at your target, and then follow through. BEEF, balance, elbow, eyes, follow through. That's an example of cues. So when I come back to this characteristic, cues are established and taught. I have in parentheses visual aid. A visual aid is great to use when you're teaching. It's a visual representation of what the cues are, so your students can always come back to it. I'm going to talk a little bit more about visual aids in a later slide. Our next characteristic is done in slow motion and in parts relating to the whole. I talked about this a little bit with the full speed. So you should, if you can, break down your skill and do it in slow motion. Again, depending on the skill. You can't do a forward roll in slow motion. You can't do a high jump in slow motion. So you have to think about the skill and say, hey, will this one work for me? Can I do this in slow motion? Is it going to help my demonstration, enhance my demonstration if I do this one in slow motion? And then again, going back to the full speed characteristic, always go back after you do it in slow motion, do it again in full speed. Another thing that is good to do when you're demonstrating a skill is to show common faults. Showing common faults will highlight what your students shouldn't do. And then if they're doing it, they may realize a little bit sooner that they are doing it and then correct that. So a common fault for a volleyball set is to catch the ball. If you let your students know, don't catch the ball, they'll be more aware of that. And it may be less likely that they do that common fault at the beginning. Our next characteristic is show the skill from different angles. You always want to show the different angles. Show the front view, show the side view, show the other side view. While you're showing these different angles, you're showing your skill more than once. So some of these are going to start to overlap. Okay, but always try to show your skill from different angles. The one angle you don't want to show your skill from is the back view. If you show the back view, you're now taking your eyes off your students. You always have to be in a spot where you can see your students. So show different angles as a characteristic of a good demonstration. Show the front view, show a side view so you can still be watching your class, show the other side view, still watching your class. Never the back view. Don't turn your back on your class. Our next characteristic, use a student to help demonstrate. It's great to use students to demonstrate. I do this a lot in my different classes because then I can talk through the skill as my student is doing it. It's just like using a video. And you can use a video to demonstrate also. But using a student gives you the opportunity to say, hey, take a look at this, take a look at this. It's easier to pick things out and explain it with someone next to you. At least I find it easier. I like using students to help me demonstrate. When we get into our next lab, Lab C, and you're going to start demonstrating tasks, I even more strongly suggest that you use students to help you demonstrate your tasks. But we'll get into that in the next lab. Using a student to help demonstrate may also help with student self-efficacy. You want to make sure your students are feeling comfortable with the skill and they are motivated to try it. If you have a student come up and do it, they see a peer and they see that student, that peer doing this skill, and they may be more likely to say, oh, if they can do it, I can do it. So it may help with some self-efficacy and some motivation to work on this skill. What you don't want to do is decrease the student's self-efficacy. I've seen people demonstrate skills where they made it really complex. I remember taking self-defense, and my instructor, day 1 or 2, kind of like busted out this kata that you have to do. And it was really intimidating, and I really didn't want to get up and try the kata. So think about that self-efficacy when you're demonstrating as well. When you're performing your Lab B, and you will be doing this in the gym, you're going to have to demonstrate at least 3 of these characteristics, and it's your choice which ones you want to use, and based on the skill, you should select the ones that are going to work for the skill that you're performing. I do have a list of skills that you're going to choose from, and for example, a forward roll is on that. Obviously, you cannot show this one in slow motion, so that wouldn't be one of the characteristics of a good demonstration that you choose to use for this lab. You may do it more than once. You're definitely going to do it in full speed. You may show different angles. That's 3 characteristics that you've already used. So it's very easy to get those 3 characteristics. You can use more, and I'm going to talk about that more when I explain what you're doing for Lab B in your preparation folder. Let's go back and talk about visual aids. So a visual aid is any visual information that will enhance your teaching of a skill or a topic. It could be a handout that you share with your class. It could be a poster that you create. Posters are great because you'll teach a skill one day, you can put the poster up on the wall, and then in the following classes, it's most likely you're going to come back and use that skill again. Your students can review the cues and be reminded of the cues in subsequent classes. So visual aids are great. You should always be creating visual aids and make your gym visually appealing. What makes a good visual aid? You don't want to just slap some cues up on the wall. You want to make sure that, like I said just before, your visual aid is visually appealing. So what you want to do, make sure you're using colors, but only a few. You don't want to use a lot of colors because it'll make it distracting. So use a few colors, 2 or 3, not too many, but not too few. You don't want to just black and white, have black and white up on your visual aid. It's kind of a boring visual aid. So again, make it visually appealing. Make sure your visual aid is neat. If you have bad handwriting, like I do, use your computer to print out your letters and put them up on your visual aid. Unless you have very, very neat handwriting, do not rely on your handwriting when making the visual aid. Number 3, spelling. Make sure all of your words are spelled correctly. Like we've heard in other classes, proofreading is important. Always proofread your visual aid. Contrast. Contrast has to do with the color of the background and the color of the information that you're sharing. If you have a white poster, make sure you're not using a yellow marker, because when you back away, you're not going to be able to see it. So make sure you have a good contrast so that the information you're putting on your poster or your visual aid is going to stand out and people are going to be able to see it. You need to be able to view it from 30 feet. Think about the gym. If you're standing in the middle of the gym, you want to be able to see your visual aid. You don't want to have to move too far to be able to review the content. You want your students to be able to access it while they're practicing the skill. Pictures can make your visual aid a lot more visually appealing. So any sort of picture that you can add. Sometimes you can find pictures breaking down the skill, showing the different parts. Those are great to use. And again, one more time, just make it visually appealing. Make a poster that people are going to want to look at, that catches the eye so that they read the information. I'm going to share a couple examples of visual aids, and then I'm going to show you most likely what you're going to create for your visual aid for Lab B. Here are some examples. I'm sorry, my recording box is over it, but you can download the PowerPoint and take a closer look at these. So what this does, it has a title, overhand throw cues. You can see these right here. And then it has the 4 cues with a picture. Turn side to the target, step with opposite foot, throw, follow through. So cues, short phrases, words that help the students remember how to do the skill. Here's another example. So this is soccer dribbling cues. Again, it has a title. Always give your visual aid a title. And then the cues, eyes up, eyes alert, eyes up, can't see that one, and inside, outside taps. But again, you can see that. And this is just an example, so you see what the visual aid. Here's a visual aid that has a couple cues on it and gives you a little bit information. And this one has the pictures breaking down the skill like I was talking about before. You can do a Google search and find these and include them on your visual aid. Print them out, tape them onto your visual aid, and then your students can see those. But these are great to kind of break down the skill with pictures. These visual aids are an example of what you are most likely going to create for your Lab B. So you're going to select a skill, and then you are going to create a visual aid on a poster that you're going to bring with you, put up on the wall behind you while you do your Lab B. You can see it has the title, Dribbling Cues, and then it has the cues listed, and then they give a nice picture just to make this one visually appealing. For the passing cues, it almost looks like they're doing the pass. It's showing that palms out as you do that. And again, here's the one I mentioned before, beef. They have different cues. Bend knees, eyes on target, extend arms, follow through. As a conclusion to this lecture, let's just review the different things I've gone over. So the social learning theory, just very briefly, people learn from each other, and that's why demonstrations are important in physical education. Your students are going to learn from watching what you do. Self-efficacy is how well you think you can do something. So as you're demonstrating, make sure that you're increasing the self-efficacy of your students to perform the skill, not decreasing the self-efficacy. Good demonstrations, there's several characteristics of good demonstrations. Demonstrate more than once, use different angles, establish your cues. And again, when you do your Lab B, you want to use at least 3 of those characteristics when you're demonstrating your skill. And then visual aids. A visual aid is anything you use that enhances the teaching, okay, that enhances and helps your students learn how to do the skill. And you saw those examples, and you will be creating a visual aid to use when you perform your Lab B in the gym. Now that you've completed watching this lecture, I want you to go and complete the Check for Understanding quiz that you can find in the Lab B content folder.